Hello and welcome to Comic Culture. I'm Terrence Dollard, a professor in the Department of Mass Communication at the University of North Carolina at Pembroke. My guest today has written some of the most influential and acclaimed comics of the last 40 years, J.M. DeMatteis. J.M., welcome back to Comic Culture.
Hey, happy to be here. It's been a long time.
Well, the last time we were here talking, I guess it was sometime around 2016 or 17, and a lot has happened since then, especially with the comics industry embracing crowdsourcing. And you've recently begun, I believe, 4 or 5 series as part of crowdsourcing. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the DeMatteis.
Sure, I'd be happy to. You know, I thought about Kickstarter for some years now because I love the idea that it removes this wall between the creator and the audience. You know, you're not going through some publisher. And also, over the years, it's gotten harder and harder with creator-owned work to really make any kind of money, even if you're going through a publisher. So the idea of just going straight to the readers with this was very appealing to me. What wasn't appealing to me was all the work that had to go into it, not the creative work. You know, the work of the Kickstarter itself, which is a massive undertaking. And you don't even, no matter how much I thought it was massive, it was even more massive when we got into it. But I have a friend named David Baldy who has worked in TV for 20 years. He's a writer and a producer. And he took one of my writing classes. We became friends, and we were just talking about this idea of doing a Kickstarter. And he said, well, I'll help you with that. We'll work together. We'll be partners. And to have someone else on board, I was ready to do it. And then we started talking about, well, what do you want to do? Well, like everybody, I've got so many ideas stockpiled. There are always ideas I'm working on there. You know, it's half finished here, it's a quarter finished there, it's just an idea there, whatever. And so I started talking about 4 different projects. And he went, oh, I have a great idea. Let's do all 4 of them. Let's do, instead of kickstarting, say, 1 miniseries, let's do 4 number ones, 4 different genres, 4 different artists, 4 different styles. And then when it's done, whoever supports the Kickstarter and supports all 4 books gets to vote on which will be the one to continue. So that was great. So we literally, I mean, all of these books are vastly different. And you can't confuse them. The artists, great artists, Sean McManus, Matthew Dow Smith, David Baldion, Tom Mandrake, fantastic artists. And then toward the end, I had another project I was developing with an artist called The Edward Glue Mysteries. And we said, let's throw that in as a 5th bonus book at the end, you know, which was great because people really responded to that. So, you know, the good news is it was hugely successful. The bad news was after a month of it, I just wanted to crawl into a hole and just go to sleep for a while, you know, because you really have to be on top of it almost 24/7. Because the reality is if you're using social media to bring people in, well, you know, the truth of social media is if I tweet something, say at 1 o'clock, at 1:15, there could be thousands of people on there that were not there at 1 o'clock that didn't see it. So David and I, and then the artists joined in as well. You had to really keep beating the drum. So it was exhausting, but it was exhilarating. It turned into one of the most joyful creative projects of my entire career, despite the fact that it was so exhausting. And the books just arrived recently from the printer. Everything looks great, and they should be going out next month to everybody that supported the Kickstarter. And then we hope we'll do the voting, and then we will hopefully sometime in the fall kickstart the complete mini series for the one that gets the most votes. But the plan is to get them all out there, and you know, to get 5 ideas out at once, that was really something. Well,
what's really something is, first off, that you have to sort of get into this management mindset to run the Kickstarter and then, I guess, deal with a publisher, someone who's actually going to physically print the books out, and then engage with customers once they, you know, join the support, support the project. So how do you sort of make sure that all of that business stuff gets done and you're still able to, you know, maybe sit down and find some time to be creative and do what you really want to do, which is write comics?
I can do that by partnering up with someone like David Baldy, who takes care of most of that stuff. He's great. The great thing about David is, aside from being a creative, he also is a businessman. He has his own business that he's run for years. So he's got the creative brain and the business brain. So all those things that I really did not want to deal with, he's been dealing with. You know, my focus was on the creative end and then just on the promotion end. I must have done 20 podcasts in the course of that month that we had the Kickstarter going. And, you know, 20 times saying the same thing over and over again. and trying to say it with sincerity and enthusiasm, because you don't want to be you don't want to be programming it and just spitting it out like a robot. So like I said, by the end of that month, I was exhausted, but thank God for David Baldy, because he's the one that's kind of kept the trains running, and it all worked out great.
And you mentioned the artists that you got to work with, and I'm just wondering, as you're coming up with these concepts, are you thinking like this artist would be perfect for it, or is it a conversation you have with an artist and then you suddenly come up with this idea to work together? And when the books do start to get written, are you letting them kind of have a free rein in that Marvel style, or are you delivering the full script and maybe adjusting once you get the pages in?
All right, that question requires about 20 answers now. A couple of the projects were already in development with an artist. There's a book called Godsend, which is sort of Kirby Gods meet The Matrix meets Philip K. Dick, And I was working, Matthew Dow Smith and I were working on that together. I mentioned that the fifth bonus book, The Evergloom Mysteries, I was working with this wonderful Greek artist, Vasilis Goxilis. We were working on that already. The others, although they were ideas that I had for years, some of them, we did not have anybody. But for instance, one of them is a supernatural Western. It was very easy to make the leap to Tom Mandrake, because Tom can do supernatural like nobody's business, and he does Westerns like nobody's business. So that was an easy one. That was a no-brainer. And then Any Man, which is probably the closest to a traditional superhero, although once you get into the story, you discover that it's really not as traditional as you think. I had just finished the Ben Reilly Spider-Man miniseries at Marvel with David Baldy on, and I was not even aware of his art before then. And I just, in the course of working on that series, fell in love with his work. So we recruited David for that. So it all, comes different ways. And in terms of Marvel style versus full script, I want to say two things about that. One is people have a very distorted view of what Marvel style is, because they hear those stories from the 60s of Stan Lee going to Jack Kirby, let's bring back Dr. Doom. And then Jack goes home and draws a 4-issue epic and plots the whole thing. That's not how it works when you're working Marvel style. My plots when I work Marvel style are very, very detailed, page by page, panel by panel, camera angles, dialogue, themes, it's all in there. The beauty of working Marvel style is that you still delay that final step of the dialogue until you get the artwork. So even though I'm laying it out very precisely in the plot, you get to react to the artwork. So maybe that sequence where you thought you'd need a lot of words, you look at the art and you go, wow, that artist delivered everything I wanted. I don't have to say anything on this page. Or the reverse, a sequence that you thought would be perfectly clear, you realize, no, I need to juice this with some narrative, I need to juice it with some dialogue. So 2 of the books were done plot first, and 2 of the books were done full script, and I like working both ways. And the truth of the matter is, even when you're working full script, where the whole script is there, page 1, panel 1, caption, dialogue, everything, you give that to 5 different artists, you're going to get 5 different stories back in a lot of ways, even though they're all following the script very exactly, because everybody's style is different. Where they put the emphasis is different. The way one panel leads into another may be different. So it's always an interesting process. And, for me, doing this for so many years, still the greatest thrill for me of doing comics is that moment, used to come in the mail, now it comes in the email, when you get the artwork back for the first time. And this thing that's been living in your head, sometimes for years, suddenly it comes to life. And that's the moment when I am 10 years old again on my living room floor reading a comic book, because that thrill has never gone away.
And what is really fascinating, because first off, as comic fans, we love to get those books and we love to read them, and it's always gratifying to know that the creators share that passion and that joy for reading comics. But one of the things that I find really fascinating about your career is that you are able to slip between genres. You're able to do superheroics, you're able to do supernatural, you're able to do slice of life, and you're able to do maybe something that's more of an all ages book. And you do them all quite well. So as a writer, how do you kind of shift those gears and make sure that the stories hit the points that they need to for the various audiences, but also, satisfy you as the author? Well,
what satisfies me is just what you're saying, being able to jump through different genres and styles. And after that, it's just about the story, letting the story lead you where it will. If you're working on I'm working on an all ages fantasy, that's not the same as working on some creator-owned metaphysical, psychological thing that I'm working on, or it's not the same as working on Spider-Man, or doing a project with Keith Giffen where we're doing comedy or whatever it may be. So it's all about the story and the characters. And once you make that connection to the story and the characters, I'm not thinking I am working in a different genre now or anything like that. I'm just following the story. A couple of years ago, I hadn't even realized it. I look back And I was doing Craven's Last Hunt, which is as dark a Spider-Man story as has ever been written, and Justice League International, which was a comedy superhero book, at the same time. And at the time I was doing it, I wasn't thinking about it. Years later, I look back and went, well, isn't that interesting? I got to work all these different parts of my brain and my creative muscles by jumping back and forth between these two things. And that's what keeps it interesting. And that's why I've also, I've worked in television for more than 20 years. I work in prose because I could never just do the one thing. I think there are some people out there, and God bless them, that really love superheroes so much that's just what they want to do. And I can't. I'm always looking for something different to excite me, or else I might have quit doing it years ago.
I'm always surprised when I look back at cover dates and I see that certain books came out at certain times, along with other books. I didn't realize that you were working on Justice League at the same time you were working on Craven's Last Hunt. And I guess, back in those days, jumping between publishers wasn't done as often as it is now. So was that some sort of, special minefield that you had to negotiate?
I'm trying to think. I have to look back. It was a long time ago. I started at DC. Then I had a number of years where I was exclusive at Marvel. And then what happened was I left Marvel, went back to DC. But here's the thing. I learned my lesson after a few years in the business, that the essence of being a freelancer is the word free. Because you never know. On Monday, if you're working for company A and everybody loves you, they think you're the greatest thing since sliced bread. And Tuesday, we got a new editor-in-chief and he thinks you're awful and the work dries up, You always have to keep the door open. You always have to be working on something else. After a certain point, I always made it my business to go back and forth. And I think I went to DC, I got involved with Justice League, but right around the same time, Marvel asked me to come back to Spider-Man, and that's where Craven developed, and it just happened that way. And even later on, there was a period again where I was exclusive to Marvel, but I made sure that I was only exclusive for superheroes so I could go work on my creator-owned stuff at Vertigo.
Speaking of creator-owned stuff, you are, I guess, one of the pioneers of creator-owned work. I'm thinking of Moonshadow you were working under the Epic imprint at Marvel, and then you were able to take that book to DC's Vertigo, and then I guess, I forget where you took it finally to get the omnibus.
Dark Horse did a beautiful, beautiful edition a couple of years ago, and we have some new editions that hopefully will be out from Dark Horse next year, even better than the last one.
So when you are coming up with this creator-owned property back then, compared to a creator-owned property in 2023 or 2022, what are the big differences between, in the 80s and the current times?
Well, one of the differences was when you worked for Epic or later Vertigo, you got paid a good rate going in, and yet you still had creator rights on those things. And that's, to go do creator, original work and still be well compensated up front, it's a great thing. It's a really great thing. Now, a lot of the deals are really, you're going in with the company, the creators are working for free, or they're working for a low page rate, and then all your money's on the back end. Whereas then it was a great thing to do all these projects that I did Epic, I did Moonshadow and Blood, and then I did a bunch of things for Vertigo and Paradox Press, and to get paid while you're following this creative vision, that was a great thing. And but those days are long gone.
Well, I guess you have to remain nimble in this industry, especially as the trends have certainly changed. And I was reading recently that the superhero comics that I grew up reading and that you grew up writing, I guess not growing up writing, but that you were writing while I was reading them, they are, those numbers are going down, and we see other genres that are sort of stepping in and taking that. And again, going back to your ability to shift between those genres, you do have some themes that come up in your work, and it always seems to be around that age, that sweet spot for the comic reader. And I'm wondering if that was something that's conscious, or if it's just something that you always found interesting and your work tends to maybe aim in that direction.
Now, which themes are we talking about?
Let's say a coming of age, or we're coming, sort of figuring out what it's like to be an adult, even though, you might not want to grow up, like a Guy Gardner.
There's that, but I think it's more figuring out what it is to be a human on this planet, as opposed to specifically the adolescent thing, because, a lot of those questions that we start asking ourselves when we're 16, 17, 18, don't go away. A lot of people start asking them and then put them away and kind of go on sometimes robotically with their lives. But those questions will always come back. And I think the older we get, the more they do come back. what is my purpose? Why am I here? Is there meaning? Is there God? All these things, I think all my stories, when you get down to it, whether it's from a psychological vantage point, emotional, spiritual, metaphysical, it's all asking kind of the big why. Why is this happening? And it's fun because you can put the camera on a psychological lens or a spiritual lens, all these different lenses, but the fundamental questions are the same. Who am I? I also love stories about the gap between who we think we are and who maybe we really are. And that's there's always room for great stories in there. So I don't think about those as themes that are specifically for a certain age or a certain audience, because there's still the things that I think about and deal with and wrestle with in my own life now.
Again, it's interesting because you clearly are a philosopher as well as a writer. You're thinking of things and putting them to words, and like you said, a lot of folks do sort of close the door on that sort of thought because they have to get on the train at a certain time or work down at the quarry. Although I don't know if anyone works at quarries anymore.
I was just at the quarry this morning. It was really fun.
I was talking to Fred and Barney.
That's right.
So you've made great partnerships over the years. I'm thinking of Kevin McGuire, Sal Buscema, and Mike Zeck. So when you are coming up with a project, do you sometimes just think to yourself, this would be perfect for Kevin, or gosh, it's great that Sal is going to be working with me on Spider-Man because I know what they can deliver, or is there a joy in finding the unexpected with a new artist that you may never have worked with?
It's both. When you're working on a creator-owned book, that's when you're really actively seeking out the creative partner that is right for the project and kind of right for you psychologically and emotionally, because you want someone that you can really get along with, because you're creating this thing together that you hope will have life going forward. Now, when you're working on monthly books for Marvel and DC, you often don't have any choice. It's a machine. And you're turning the script, they get an artist, they get a warm body, and you hope that the warm body turns out to be Mike Zeck or Sal Buscema. I remember back when I was working with Sal on Spectacular Spider-Man, I had a choice. They said, well, we could either have Sal or artist B over here. And I said, Sal, please. I'd worked with Sal before, and he had done some fill-ins on some books I was writing. But this was the first time we had an active collaboration. And it was one of those magical moments where the first page, first panel, something happened, something magical happened. And Zeck and I, same thing. It's like with Zeck, until we worked on Captain America together for 3 years, we developed a chemistry together. So when we jumped a couple of years later to Kraven's Last Hunt, it's like we'd been in the gym and we'd worked all those muscles so we could just hit the ground running. And you hope for that. But the same thing, as I mentioned with David Baldion for this Kickstarter project, I didn't know who he was. They showed me some art. I said, oh yeah, I guess that'd be good. And then you work with somebody and something clicks and it's magical. It's really magical. And I've often said, it's like the chemistry between people. You walk into a party, you start talking to somebody, and the conversation's just dying. It's like you're shooting arrows over each other's heads. You're just not connecting. You turn around, you accidentally bump into somebody, you start talking, and there is just chemistry from the minute you open your mouth. It's the same thing with writers and artists. The chemistry is either there or it's not. And I've said this before, but I've had it happen where I think I wrote a really good script. I think that artist did a really good job. And you put us together and the story just kind of like gasps and falls on its back. I don't know why it happens or why it doesn't, but it's and that's the part I like. I like the magic and the mystery of the creative process. I like the place where the story seems to be coming from another dimension and being beamed through my head, and I'm surprised by it. I like that this chemistry happens between two people and you can't explain it. That's the fun part of the creative process, is the stuff that we can't really explain. And it's the same thing with the stories in the audience. I sail these stories out into the world. I might go, this is the greatest damn story I've ever written. And you sail it out and nobody pays any attention. Then you do another story that you thought was, that was okay. And it becomes the classic that keeps getting reprinted that everybody keeps talking about. But that's between the audience and the story. It almost has nothing to do with me, And then there's the weird thing where work comes out and it seems to just go nowhere. And like 15 years later, all of a sudden, everybody seems to have discovered it. And that's always delightful. I go to a convention and they come up with this run on a book that I know when it came out, everybody kind of went, and now they love it. So I can't explain that. I can't control it. It's another interesting mystery of the creative process.
When we talk about the creative process, and I know that you work a lot to help other writers get better, it is work. So, waiting for the muse to hit is one thing, but being able to deliver a script every month or multiple scripts every month is discipline and work. So how do you kind of balance between the inspiration and the discipline to make sure that everything gets done and delivered?
You need both things. You really need both things. What I see that happens is that if I have the time to allow the muse to visit, sometimes it's not even allowing. Sometimes I just wake up in the morning and there's a movie playing in my head and I go, ooh, what's that? And I watch the movie. Oh, that's really interesting. And I run into my office and I go to my computer and I write it down. I don't know where it came from. I don't know what it is. Another time, though, it's like they call you up and they say, hey, we want you to do this Spider-Man series, and here's the idea they want you to do. And sometimes your first reaction is, I didn't really want to do that, but and then all of a sudden you go off and the same thing happens. Something starts going. It's all the magic of the unconscious. One way, and it may get telescoped down. That process that might take 6 months if you have all the time in the world could take 6 minutes when you have a deadline. But the movie will start playing. I'll have a conversation with an editor and they'll say, hey, what about something like this? And I'll hang up the phone. And the next thing I know, I'm talking to my wife and I'm going, we could do this and that and that. And all the ideas just start bursting out of your head. Now, if you don't get that, then you have to rely solely on your craft. And you hope that as you're building the story through craft alone, and I don't mean it in a demeaning way, I look at it like a plumber. Give me the pipe. I'll put the pipe together and I'll make that sink work. And you hope that at some point when you're putting the pipe together, and forgive this horrible metaphor, the water of inspiration will flow through those pipes. And at some point it will click and off you'll go. Plus the conscious mind is a great editor. I don't care how amazing my inspiration is, and I may fill 50 pages with notes, but when you sit down to craft that story, you need your conscious mind in there to clean it up, to get those pipes just right, to make sure they all connect up the right way. So you need both. You really need both. But it's in the inspiration that I find the most magic.
It's funny, I teach a screenwriting class and I tell my students all the time about writer's block, and no one ever talks about plumber's block, how they just don't feel like putting pipes down today. It's nice to know that somebody who knows what they're talking about is using the same type of metaphor.
And I don't believe in writer's block. That's what I learned over the years. It's about allowing your unconscious the time and room that it needs. It's not that you're blocked. Your unconscious is always working on this stuff, always working on this stuff. And sometimes your conscious mind hasn't gotten hip to what's going on back there yet, And you got to take a breath, take a walk around the block, go, if you're a musician, go play the piano or the guitar or something, go do something else and just give it the time and the room. And again, we're talking about deadlines. I find that somehow if there's a deadline, that whole process, even if you feel blocked, gets telescoped down. It's like the unconscious knows, I need to speed it up right now because he's only got 2 days to do this. I'm always amazed when I go through a process, and I shouldn't admit this publicly. Sometimes it's like I'm working on the thing, an animated movie, say you've got 6 weeks to get the first draft done. And a lot of my process is, I liken it to, when you watch a dog before it's going to lay down on the carpet and it walks in circles and circles, and then finally it goes, I could spend 5 of those 6 weeks walking in circles, just walking in circles. Now, while I'm walking in circles, my unconscious mind is churning and churning and working on this and working on it. My conscious mind might feel kind of frustrated. I'm not ready to sit down. I don't know. But I've learned over the years to just let it go. And then that last week, it opens up and off you go, and there's the whole draft. It's an interesting process. Like I said, it's endlessly fascinating to me. And after doing it for like 40 years, I still don't understand it. And the fact that I don't understand it is what I love most about it.
One of the reasons why I have this show is because I find the creative process endlessly fascinating, and hearing how people sort of work their problems through, there is that commonality, which is your mind knows what it's doing even if you don't know that it's doing
exactly.
it.
And then it goes beyond the unconscious, because I really think there's the unconscious mind is like a doorway to something bigger. And I only say this half jokingly because I kind of believe it. It's like there's a universe of story out there. And I sometimes imagine a particular story forming out there in the universe, and it's looking for the right person to funnel itself through. And it goes to writer A, and no, it's not the right one. It's almost like the 3 bears, and it goes to the other bed and it's a little too hard, And then it finds me, and it comes in and it enters through the doorway of my unconscious. And then the trick is, it picks me because of the filter of my personal experience, because each writer could take the same idea, and because of the filter of our personal experience and what we've been through in our lives, we're going to interpret that story differently. So it's almost like the story exists separately, and yet it needs us to bring a very personal touch to it. It's a fascinating thing.
It is, and I see we have about a minute left in our conversation. I was wondering, the folks at home, if they're watching, if they wanted to find out more about the DeMatteis or about your writing workshops, how can they find you on the web?
The easiest way is you can follow me on Twitter, which is just JM DeMatteis on Twitter. My website is jmdmatteis.com. I'm on Instagram, jm.dmatteis, except no substitutes because there have been a few. And I'm on Facebook too. So I actually enjoy social media tremendously. It's a wonderful give and take with the fans, and it's a great way to communicate with them.
Well, JM, I want to thank you so much for taking time out to communicate with me. It's been a great conversation, and I look forward to seeing the books when they do come out. I'd like to thank everyone at home for watching Comic Culture. We will see you again soon.